Before starting the story, please like and subscribe the channel. I am just an old lad that is trying hard to get by. Please watch till the end because this is one of my favorite stories. Okay, let's dive in. My name is Jack Harper, and I'm 34 years old. I used to be a park ranger in Blackwood National Forest, nestled deep in the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia. It's a place where the dense forest canopy almost blots out the sky, and the air always seems to carry the scent of damp earth and pine. The forest has an ancient, almost primeval feel to it, as if it remembers a time long before humans ever set foot in it. I took the job after a rough breakup. Amanda, my fiancée, couldn't handle the isolation that came with living in the mountains. She craved the bustling energy of the city, while I found peace in the quiet, in the solitude of the forest. We parted ways and I threw myself into my work, hoping the wilderness could heal what was broken inside me. That summer, Blackwood was quieter than usual. The tourists, usually eager to hike the trails and explore the wilderness, had thinned out, leaving the park almost eerily deserted. It was during this time that the first disappearance occurred. A solo hiker, a middle-aged man from Michigan, vanished without a trace. His car was found parked at the trailhead, but there was no sign of him, no gear, no tracks, nothing. I remember Sheriff Tom Bowers, a gruff, no-nonsense kind of guy, shaking his head as we stood by the man's car. "Folks get lost in these woods all the time, Harper," he said, his voice carrying the weight of years spent searching for the missing. "But this one, something feels off." I couldn't shake the feeling either. Blackwood was vast, sure, but it wasn't the kind of place where people just vanished, not without leaving some kind of sign. But there was nothing, not a single clue as to where that hiker had gone. A few days later, it happened again. This time it was a young couple who had been camping near the western ridge. Their tent was found still pitched, their campfire cold, but they were gone. Like the first hiker, there were no tracks, no signs of a struggle, just an empty campsite. Sheriff Bowers and I combed through the area, looking for anything that might explain their disappearance, but we found nothing. The only thing that struck me as odd was the silence. Normally, Blackwood was alive with the sounds of birds, insects, and the occasional rustle of a deer moving through the underbrush. But that day, it was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. "We need to close the trails," I suggested to Bowers as we stood on the ridge, looking out over the forest. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows through the trees. "Until we figure out what's going on." Bowers frowned, chewing on the end of a toothpick. "We don't have enough to go on, Jack. Could just be folks getting lost. But yeah, something doesn't sit right with me either." That night back in my cabin, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the creaks and groans of the old wooden structure as the wind whispered through the trees outside. I drifted off into a fitful sleep, only to be woken by a sound that sent a shiver down my spine. A low, distant moan, carried on the wind from deep within the forest. It wasn't the howl of a wolf or the call of an owl. It was something else, something I'd never heard before. The sound was almost human, but twisted, distorted in a way that made my skin crawl. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, straining to listen as the sound faded into the night. For a moment, I considered grabbing my flashlight and heading out to investigate, but a deep, primal instinct rooted me to the spot. Whatever made that sound, it didn't belong here. It was as if the forest itself was warning me to stay inside. The next morning, I found myself at the ranger station, nursing a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Sheriff Bowers was there, along with a couple of his deputies. The air was thick with unease as we discussed the disappearances. Bowers looked as tired as I felt, his eyes dark with worry. "We need to do a sweep of the forest," I said, my voice betraying the tension I was trying to keep under control. "Something's out there, and we need to find it before anyone else goes missing." Bowers nodded slowly. "We'll organize a search party, but Jack, be careful. I've been doing this job a long time, and I've seen some strange things, but this feels different." We spent the next few hours preparing. I gathered my gear, flashlight, map, compass, and my service revolver, though I doubted it would be much help against whatever was lurking in the woods. By mid-afternoon, the search party was ready. A group of 10 men, including Bowers and his deputies, along with a few local volunteers who knew the forest well. As we set out into the woods, the tension among us was palpable. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees towering like silent sentinels, their branches weaving a dense canopy overhead. The deeper we went, the quieter it became, until the only sounds were our footsteps crunching on the forest floor and the occasional murmur of conversation. Hours passed with no sign of the missing hikers. No tracks, no broken branches, no clothing snagged on a bush. It was as if they had been plucked out of existence. The only thing we found was a strange pattern in the ground near the western ridge, a circle of disturbed earth, with a series of deep gouges radiating out from the center, like something had clawed its way up from beneath the surface. "What the hell is this?" one of the volunteers muttered, staring at the pattern with wide eyes. I didn't have an answer. The sight of it filled me with a sense of dread I couldn't shake. We marked the location on the map and continued on, but the unease only grew stronger as the sun dipped lower in the sky. Just as we were about to turn back, we heard it, the same low moan that had woken me the night before, echoing through the trees. This time it was closer, much closer. It reverberated through the forest, making the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. "Did you hear that?" one of the deputies asked, his voice tight with fear. "Yeah," I replied, my hand instinctively going to the grip of my revolver. "Stay sharp." We moved forward cautiously, every sense on high alert. The sound came again, louder, more insistent. It was coming from a dense thicket up ahead, where the trees were so close together that they blocked out the fading light. I signaled for the others to follow me as I pushed through the undergrowth, my heart racing. The moan grew louder still, almost unbearable, and then, suddenly, it stopped. We emerged into a small clearing, and what we saw froze us in our tracks. In the center of the clearing, illuminated by the last slivers of daylight filtering through the trees, was something that defied explanation. A massive, gnarled tree stood alone, its roots tangled and exposed, twisting out of the ground like the claws of some ancient beast. But it wasn't the tree itself that sent chills down my spine. It was what was hanging from its branches. Strips of cloth, some weathered and tattered, others looking almost new, fluttered in the slight breeze. They were tied to the branches in a way that was disturbingly deliberate, as if placed there as a warning or a marker. Among the strips of cloth, I could make out pieces of torn clothing, shirts, pants, even a few hiking boots dangling like grotesque ornaments. Bowers stepped forward, his face pale, and carefully reached up to untie one of the strips. He examined it closely before showing it to the rest of us. The fabric was stained, the dark blotches unmistakably blood. "Jesus," one of the volunteers whispered, taking a step back. "What the hell is going on here?" I didn't have an answer. My eyes were drawn to the base of the tree, where something else caught my attention. The earth around the roots was freshly disturbed, the ground uneven as if something had been buried or unearthed there recently. "Check this out," I called to Bowers, pointing at the disturbed ground. He knelt beside me, running his hand over the dirt. "Looks like something was dug up," he muttered, his brow furrowed. "Or buried." The unease that had been building in my chest threatened to overwhelm me. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that whatever had done this was still out there, lurking just beyond the edge of the clearing. "We need to get back to the station," I said, standing up abruptly. This isn't right." Bowers nodded, his eyes still fixed on the tree. "Agreed. Let's move out." We turned to leave, but as we did, the low moan came again, this time so close that it felt like it was coming from within the clearing itself. The sound was followed by a rustling in the underbrush, and then, without warning, something burst out from the shadows. It was a figure, hunched and twisted, its movements jerky and unnatural. For a split second, I thought it was a person, maybe one of the missing hikers, but as it staggered into the clearing, the light revealed the truth. The thing that stood before us was no longer human. Its skin was mottled and gray, stretched taut over a skeletal frame. Its eyes were sunken, almost hollow, and its mouth hung open in a silent scream. But what struck me the most was the gaping wound in its chest, a jagged tear that should have been fatal. The creature, or whatever it was, staggered toward us, its movements erratic, as if it was being controlled by something unseen. The moan, that dreadful sound, was now a guttural wheeze, escaping from its lifeless throat. For a moment, none of us moved. We were paralyzed by the sheer horror of what we were seeing. Then, as if snapping out of a trance, Bowers drew his revolver and fired. The gunshot echoed through the clearing, startling birds from the treetops, but the creature didn't fall. It staggered backward, a dark ooze leaking from the wound where the bullet had struck, but it kept coming. "Fall back," I shouted, grabbing Bowers by the arm and pulling him with me as we retreated toward the edge of the clearing. The others followed, fear and confusion etched on their faces. The creature let out another moan, this one filled with rage, and lunged at us. I raised my revolver, firing twice, each shot striking its target, but it only seemed to slow the thing down. "Run!" I yelled, and we all turned, fleeing into the forest as the creature lurched after us, its wheezing moans growing louder with each step. We ran through the forest, our breaths coming in ragged gasps, the underbrush clawing at our legs as we tore through the dense foliage. Behind us, the creature's guttural moans echoed, growing fainter but still present, as if it was toying with us, letting us know it wasn't far behind. I glanced over my shoulder, catching a glimpse of the thing moving through the trees. It wasn't fast. Its movements were halting, erratic, but there was something about its persistence, the way it seemed to know exactly where we were going, that made my blood run cold. It was as if it was herding us, driving us deeper into the forest. We finally burst out onto a narrow trail, the sudden openness a brief relief from the oppressive closeness of the woods. I could see the ranger station's lights in the distance, flickering through the trees like a beacon of hope. We just needed to make it there. "Don't look back," Bowers barked, his voice strained. "Keep moving." We sprinted down the trail, the ground uneven beneath our feet, our fear giving us speed. But the station, though visible, seemed to remain frustratingly far away, the trees stretching out, elongating the path. My legs burned, my chest heaved, but I didn't dare slow down. Then as we rounded a bend, I heard a cry from behind. One of the volunteers, a young man named Eric, had stumbled, his foot catching on a root, sending him sprawling to the ground. He tried to get up, but his ankle twisted under him, and he fell again with a pained shout. "Help me!" he screamed, his voice laced with panic as the creature closed in. Bowers and I skidded to a stop, turning back to help him. But before we could reach him, the creature was upon him, its bony hands clawing at his legs, dragging him back into the shadows. "Eric!" I yelled, but it was too late. The last thing I saw was his terrified face, his hands outstretched toward us as he was pulled into the darkness. His screams echoed through the trees, cutting off abruptly, leaving only the sound of the creature's wheezing breath. I wanted to go after him, to pull him back, but Bowers grabbed my arm, pulling me away. "We can't help him, Jack," he said, his voice grim. "We need to get to the station now." My mind was screaming at me to fight, to do something, but I knew he was right. With a heavy heart, I turned and ran, Eric's final cry ringing in my ears. The creature didn't pursue us further. It had taken what it wanted, and the forest fell eerily silent once more as we fled. By the time we reached the station, I was shaking, a mix of exhaustion and terror coursing through me. We burst through the door, slamming it shut behind us. The small group of rangers and volunteers inside looked up in alarm, their faces pale as they took in our disheveled appearance. "What happened?" one of them asked, eyes wide with fear. "Eric's gone," Bowers said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "And there's something out there, something that shouldn't be." I leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath, my mind racing. What the hell had we just encountered? What was that thing? My thoughts were interrupted by a sudden crash from outside, the sound of something heavy hitting the side of the building. Everyone froze, the room plunging into an unbearable silence. The sound came again, louder this time, followed by a low, guttural moan. It was here. "Barricade the doors!" Bowers shouted, snapping everyone into action. We scrambled to push desks, chairs, anything we could find against the entrance, our movements frantic, fueled by fear. The creature's moans grew louder, more insistent, as it began to pound against the walls, the wooden structure groaning under the assault. I could see the fear in everyone's eyes, the realization that we were trapped, that there was no escape from whatever nightmare had crawled out of the forest. We huddled inside the ranger station, the walls trembling with each heavy impact from the creature outside. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the room. The sound of the creature's relentless pounding filled the air, a horrifying rhythm that set our nerves on edge. Bowers had taken charge, his years of experience showing through the fear that threatened to overwhelm us all. "We need to stay calm," he said, his voice steady. "If we panic, we're dead." The creature outside let out another guttural moan, followed by a loud crash that shook the entire building. It was trying to break through, and from the sounds of it, it was succeeding. I glanced around the room, searching for anything that could help us. My eyes fell on the radio equipment in the corner, and a spark of hope flared inside me. If we could get a signal out, maybe we could call for backup, for help from anyone who could reach us in time. "I'm going to try the radio," I said, moving toward the equipment. "Do it," Bowers replied, keeping his gun trained on the door, as if that alone could stop whatever was out there. I fumbled with the controls, my hands shaking as I tuned the radio, praying for a response. "This is Ranger Harper at Blackwood National Forest," I said into the mic, my voice trembling. "We're under attack by something. We need immediate assistance." There was nothing but static, the hiss of dead air filling the room. I tried again, changing frequencies, calling out to anyone who might be listening. Still, nothing. "Come on," I muttered, desperation creeping into my voice. "Come on!" Suddenly, through the static, there was a burst of noise. Someone was responding. I turned up the volume, straining to hear. "Copy, Ranger Station. En route. Hold on." The signal was weak, but it was there. Relief flooded through me as I caught fragments of the response. Someone was coming. We just had to hold out a little longer. "I think someone heard us," I said, turning back to the group. "Help is on the way." But even as I said it, the door to the station shuddered under another massive blow, the wood splintering. Whatever was outside wasn't going to wait for help to arrive. "We need a plan," one of the deputies said, his voice shaking. "We can't just sit here and wait to die." Bowers nodded grimly. "We'll have to make a run for it. If we can reach the trucks, we might be able to outrun it." "But what if it's faster than us?" one of the volunteers asked, fear making his voice waver. "Then we'll fight," Bowers said, his jaw set. "We don't have a choice." Another crash, and the door buckled inward, a gnarled hand, skeletal and clawed, reaching through the gap. The creature was almost inside. "Now!" Bowers shouted, firing at the hand, the gunshots deafening in the small space. "Move!" We bolted for the back door, adrenaline surging through us as we burst out into the night. The forest was alive with shadows, the moonlight barely penetrating the thick canopy. The trucks were parked just a few yards away, but it felt like miles as we sprinted toward them. Behind us, the creature howled, a blood-curdling sound that chilled me to the bone. I risked a glance over my shoulder and saw it emerging from the shattered doorway, its form twisting and contorting as it pulled itself free. It was faster now, more determined, and it was coming straight for us. "Get in!" Bowers yelled, wrenching open the driver's side door of the nearest truck. I dove into the passenger seat, my heart pounding, as the others piled into the truck bed. The engine roared to life, and Bowers slammed on the gas, the tires kicking up gravel as we sped down the dirt road. The creature was right behind us, keeping pace with the truck, its glowing eyes fixed on us with an intensity that made my stomach lurch. "Faster!" I urged, gripping the dashboard as we hurtled down the narrow road. The trees blurred past us, the headlights slicing through the darkness, but the creature was relentless, gaining on us with every passing second. "Hold on!" Bowers shouted, wrenching the wheel to the side as the road curved sharply. The truck skidded, fishtailing as Bowers fought to keep it under control. The creature lunged, its claws raking across the tailgate, leaving deep gouges in the metal. The volunteers in the back screamed, their terror palpable as the creature tried to claw its way into the truck bed. One of them, a young woman named Sarah, grabbed a flare gun from the emergency kit and fired it point blank into the creature's face. The flare exploded in a burst of red light, the creature recoiling with a shriek of pain. It fell back, the flames licking at its mottled skin, but it didn't stop. It just became more enraged. Bowers floored the accelerator, the truck tearing down the road as the creature struggled to put out the flames. We rounded another bend, the creature momentarily out of sight, but I knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. "We're not going to outrun it," I said, panic edging into my voice. "It's too fast." Bowers glanced at me, his face grim. "Then we need to find a place to make a stand." We sped through the forest, the truck bouncing over the uneven road, until we saw it up ahead. An old, abandoned ranger station, long since forgotten by the park's administration. It was barely more than a shack, but it had walls, a roof, and, most importantly, a view of the surrounding area. "There," Bowers shouted, steering the truck off the road and toward the station. We skidded to a stop in front of the building, the volunteers scrambling out of the truck as we bolted inside. The station was small, a single room with a few broken windows and a heavy wooden door that we quickly barricaded. It wasn't much, but it was our last line of defense. "Load up," Bowers ordered, grabbing the rifle from behind the door. "We take it down, or we die trying." We took positions by the windows, our weapons trained on the tree line, waiting for the creature to appear. The silence was deafening, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. My hands shook as I clutched my revolver, my mind racing with fear. Then out of the darkness, it came. The creature burst from the trees, charging straight for the station, its glowing eyes locked on us. It moved with unnatural speed, a blur of shadow and fury, and I knew in that moment that this was it, our last stand. "Fire!" Bowers shouted, and we unleashed everything we had. Bullets tore through the night, striking the creature. But it didn't stop. It crashed against the door, the wood splintering under the impact. We fired again and again, but nothing seemed to slow it down. "Use the flares!" Sarah shouted, grabbing another flare gun from the emergency kit. She fired, the flare hitting the creature square in the chest, igniting it in a blaze of red light. The creature howled, a sound of pure agony, but still it kept coming. It smashed through the door, its skeletal frame ablaze, its claws reaching for us. "Get back!" Bowers yelled, but there was nowhere to go. We were trapped, the walls closing in as the creature advanced. In a last desperate move, I grabbed the canister of gasoline we'd found in the shack and hurled it at the creature. The canister struck it, dousing it in fuel, and I fired a flare into the mix. The explosion was deafening. The creature went up in flames, its agonized scream piercing the night as it was engulfed in fire. It thrashed wildly, its claws tearing at the walls, but it was too late. The flames consumed it, reducing it to a smoldering heap of ash and bone. We watched in stunned silence as the creature finally fell, its charred remains collapsing in on themselves, leaving nothing but a twisted, blackened husk. The fire died down, the station filled with the acrid smell of smoke and burning flesh. It was over. We stumbled out of the station, dazed and exhausted, the adrenaline slowly fading as the reality of what had just happened set in. The night was eerily quiet, the forest still as if it too was in shock. He felt to his knees. "It's over," he said. His voice trembled. "It's finally over." And as I looked out into the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that something is still watching us. Because in places like Blackwood, the darkness never truly leaves. It waits.